solving quadratic equations yesterday, and all the ones that we had, we were able to get a nice solution from, either by factoring and using the zero product property, which tells us if two things are multiplied and equal 0, one of those things has to be a 0, or we did the square root method. If we just had a single x, then we could get it by itself and solve from there. Today, we are looking at quadratics that don't turn out nicely, so things that we can't factor, and one option for solving those is completing the square. Now, we talked about this a little bit, or you've seen this before. We also touched on it some when we were talking about our circles last week, so it's not totally new. We were doing it when we were completing the square with our circles to write it in center radius form. But we're going to continue that and apply it to some that maybe we have to do a little more work with. Completing the square will work for any quadratic equation that you're given, but it has to be set up in a certain way. So it has to be a 1x squared. So if there's any other number in front of 1 or in front of x squared, we have to divide by it. So whatever a is, divide by it. It's okay to have fractions in the other terms if it doesn't divide evenly, but we have to get a 1 here. Then we're going to move the constant over. Think about when we did our circles and we were completing the square. We always moved the constant over to the other side. And then we would group our x's together and create a perfect square. So we would talk about, looked at patterns and we said, okay, it's half that middle term squared. And so we did that and we added it to each side of the equation. So we have to do that. Then we can factor and solve it by the square root method. So let's take a look at one. We'll start out with one that has a coefficient of 1. So x squared minus 4x minus 14 equals 0. First of all, does that factor nicely? No. Is there anything that multiplies to a negative 14 and adds to a negative 4? The only things that multiply 14 would be 1 and 14, 2 and 7. So that doesn't work. So we can't factor nicely. Instead, we'll go to completing the square route. So make sure it's a 1x squared, which it is. Then we need to move our constant to the other side. So I'm going to write my x squared minus 4x. I'm going to leave myself a little space, equals 14. And then just like we did with our circles, we need to create a perfect square. So to do that, we're thinking we're making two identical parentheses. So it's always the number in front of x divided by 2 for the two parentheses, and then we have to square it. So negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. But whatever you do, you add it to both sides of your equation. Now, this should factor. What multiplies to positive 4 and adds to negative 4? Negative 2 and negative 2. So this factors into x minus 2 squared, because there's 2 of them, equals 18. And it'll always factor into something squared because we have created a perfect square. A good rule of thumb, if you're struggling, think about before we squared it. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. That's what this factors into every time. Now this is a problem that I might have given you yesterday. How could we solve for x? So if we add a square root, with that we have to do plus and minus. X minus 2 equals plus and minus. We can break 18 into 9 and 2, so that would be plus and minus 3 radical 2. And so then to get x by itself, we add over the 2. So 2 plus and minus 3 radical questions on that? Let's look at this one. All right, anything multiplied to -2 and add to -3? No, so we cannot factor nicely. It is a 1x squared, so we can go straight into completing the square. So we leave the x's over here, and we add over this 2. Then we need half of -3 squared. All right, so this did not happen with any of our circle ones. All of those worked out nicely. But when you do -3 divided by 2, that doesn't divide evenly. So let's just keep it, you could do a decimal, let's just keep it in fraction form. I think that's the easiest. Then if you square it, so -3 squared is +9, 2 squared is 4. So this is 9/4. So we might have fractions here. Everything does not work out perfectly. Does everyone understand where I got my 9/4? From there, we know we've created a perfect square, so it should factor into something squared. This is where sometimes people struggle a little more finding this number, so just think about it. It's the number before you squared, so -3/2. -3/2 squared is 9/4. -3/2 plus -3/2 is -3. Equals 2 plus 9/4. Alright, how do we get rid of the square? Square root with that plus and minus. So x minus 3/2 equals plus and minus. I cannot do the square root of 17. But I can do the square root of 4 is 2. So it's the square root of 17/2. So final step to get x by itself is to add over that 3/2. So it's 3/2 plus and minus radical 17/2. So we might still have fractions at the end. Any questions for me there? Try this. Alright, when I look at this, it's different because, why? All of the others started out with a 1x squared, and this one does not. So we do have to do a little work before we can jump right into completing the square. So it says we have to divide by a if a isn't 1. So I'm going to take both sides of this equation and divide by 9. So 9x squared over 9 is just x squared. Minus 12/9 would reduce to plus 9/9 is 1 and 0/9 is 0. Alright, now we can start completing the square. So we move over the 1. how do we find the number that we add to each side? Divide by 2, so we have negative 4/3 divided by 2, and then we have to square it. What is negative 4/3 divided by 2? So it's negative 2/3 squared.
All students who need a picture retake, Wagner's is early today and doing better. So if you guys could go down to the middle school lobby, anyone needing a retake, please go to the middle school lobby, and that includes seniors. Thank you.
Huh? September? Oh, no. It's a long time ago.
I'm gonna go down there.
Smile pretty. Okay, so negative 2/3 squared. So negative 2 squared is positive 4, 3 squared is 9, so that's 4 9. You should be able to do your stuff. I hope not, anyway. Then we've created a perfect square, so it should factor into something squared. So we're looking for what multiplies to a positive 4 9s and adds to a negative 4/3. Or we can just look back. Before we squared it, it was negative 2/3. What's negative 1 plus 4 9s? Now we have to get rid of the square, so the opposite of a square is a square root. When you square root, you do plus and minus. So x minus 2/3 equals plus or minus.
Any staff who would like a picture retake or did not get a chance to get their pictures taken last time are also welcome to go down and get their picture taken in the middle school lobby. Thank you.
What's the square root of negative 5? What would you put? I radical 5 over the square root of 9 is 3. So then to get x by itself, we just add the 2/3. So it's 2/3 plus and minus I radical 5 over 3. All right, do you guys think you can try one? Here's yours. Let's see how far we. So it's not set up to go directly into completing a square. What do we have to do first? So that gives me an x squared minus 2x equals negative 7/4. Now this one we can already go ahead. The constant is already by itself. So now we're completing the square. So to do that, we have to take the middle term, so negative 2, divide that by 2, and square it. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared, positive. So we add 1 to each side. Alright, so the factoring. Remember, we made a perfect square. It should factor into something squared. So 2 ways to figure that out. You can ask yourself, what multiplies to 1 and adds to negative 2? Negative 1 and negative 1. Or you can look, before we squared, when we did negative 2 divided by 2, that is equal to negative 1. So it's x minus 1. Negative 7/4 plus 1 is negative 3/4. Then we square root, plus and minus, so we get x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 3. And then add over the 1, so it's 1 plus and minus I radical 3 over 2. We're not there yet. So let's try some more. Some of you have it, and some of us, we still need a little more practice, and that's fine. Do you guys want to try this one on your own? Why don't you try it and let's see how far we get. Where do we have to begin? We need a positive 1x squared, so we divide everything by negative 1. So x squared minus 11x plus 6 equals 0. Now we're ready to complete the square, so we need the constant on the side by itself. So we subtract that over, so that's a negative 6. Now we make our perfect square, so it's the middle coefficient divided by 2 squared. So negative 11 over 2 doesn't reduce, but negative 11 squared is 121, 2 squared is 4. So that's 121 over 4 that we add to each side. Now, this should factor. It's a perfect square, so you can say, okay, what multiplies 121 over 4 and adds to negative 11, or just look back. Before we squared it, it was negative 11 over 2. So it's x minus 11 over 2 squared. What is that? Thank you. Okay, so then we have to square root plus and minus. So x minus 11 halves equals plus and minus. Can you do the square root of 97 or break down the square root of 97 at all? No. But the square root of 4 is 2. So we should get 11 halves plus and minus radical 97 over 2. We did better that time. Are there questions? Let's try one more. We're not 100% yet. Not everybody got it. Okay. I'll give you guys a few minutes. If we can all get it, then I'll quit. Okay. We have to divide everything by 3. So we get x squared plus 5/3 x minus 2/3 equals 0. So now we can add over the 2/3. Find your perfect square. So you take 5/3, divide that by 2, and square your answer. 5/3 divided by 2 gives you 5 over 6. So 5 over 6 squared so this factors into x, and we can look, before we squared it was a positive 5, 6, so it's x plus 5, 6 squared equals 2/3 plus 25 over 36 is 49 over 36. Then what do? Plus and minus. So x plus 5 over 6 equals plus or minus. Square root of 49 is 7. Square root of 36 is 6. So then if we subtract our 5, 6. Is this my final answer?
No.
Why? These are like terms, right? We can add them together. They have a common denominator already. Nothing has a radical. So this is negative 5 over 6 plus 7 over 6. And negative 5 over 6 minus 7 over 6. So we can get our two answers. Negative 5 over 6 plus 7 over 6 is 2/6, so 1/3. Negative 5 over 6 minus 7 over 6. Negative 12 over 6, which is negative 2. actually worked out nice. Which means the original one could have been factored by slip and slide. If you get nice answers at the end. What?
That's a lot longer.
Okay, there is a Math Excel